Hello, listeners, and welcome back again to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Some of the most interesting companies and businesses in the world are those that merge different sectors or apply new or innovative technology or approaches to well-established problems. And so my guest today has an amazing track record of doing that in the healthcare industry in the USA. So my guest is Gule Sheikh, and she will be telling us all about her experiences as a CTO working in the healthcare sector in the US, and she'll be sharing with us some of her experiences, strategies, and how she achieved success bridging the gap between healthcare and technology. This is Leading with Integrity Leadership Talk, the podcast for first-time managers who are working in tech-driven businesses and teams and who want to be more effective, people-first leaders. Each week, you will learn the crucial strategies, mindsets, and practical tips that successful modern leaders follow to be engaging, ethical, and authentic managers who get the best from their teams. And we'll achieve all of this via weekly conversations with leaders, with leadership experts, entrepreneurs, and business owners, people who have already walked this path and have some amazing insights to share, with an added sprinkling of occasional solo episodes and some group chats where we'll have multiple guests. My name is David Hatch, and I will be your host. And leadership has always been a passion for me. After a career spent in a series of small businesses during 15 years in the aerospace industry, 5 or 6 of those at the end of that career were in a space startup in the UK. So trying to launch satellites into orbit, very cool stuff. And through all of that experience, I learned that the secret to successful management is in the ability to apply great leadership. And in turn, the secret to great leadership, it's all about your integrity, putting people before profits.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Gule, thank you for joining me today from across the pond. I'm not quite sure where in the States you are. I think it's the States.
Chicago.
Chicago, excellent. Excellent. Well, yeah, thank you for taking the time out of your morning to join us today. I'm going to start the episode by handing the reins over to you a little bit to tell listeners a bit about yourself, a bit about your background, your career so far, and why you do what you do.
Okay. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I have been in the tech sector for over 23 years. And I, back then there weren't a lot of women in the space, but also technology was just very early when it came to education. And, I never looked back. So I joined really out of curiosity to see where my career would take me. I started my first job at EDS, which was a Ross Perot company. And that's where I kind of really learned about my business ethics and the foundation for how I conduct business. Fast forward to the last decade or so, I moved to Chicago from Canada. So I'm Canadian. And I started a healthcare startup called Easy Scripts. And so that's where I would say a lot of my experience in corporate really kind of tied up a lot of loose ends of what I did not know about running a business and understanding all the nuances. And, I absolutely, it's been one of the most transformational opportunities that I've had in my career, where I was really able to tie outcomes for patients with a purpose and also bring in technology to solve those problems.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you're right. When you get into that startup environment, you have to learn, don't you, very quickly, anything you don't already know.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's the positive of it as well as the challenge, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a bit more about Easy Scripts then. What's the problem you're solving with that for the listeners who maybe don't understand how it works?
So I did sell the company in 2019, so I had an exit, and so I'm no longer running Easy Scripts. But the premise of the software initially was we realized, my business partner and I, that prescriptions are all going to be electronic. And so this was back in 2013, where I think New York was looking into mandating all health records would have to be electronic. And so prescriptions was one of those areas that, doctors were still writing prescriptions, handwritten prescriptions, and that was causing problems in terms of, not problems in terms of the medication, but sometimes it was the pharmacist couldn't read the prescription, or, there wasn't any checks and balances that were occurring in terms of the doctor didn't know if patients were going to different states, bordering states, and getting prescriptions from different physicians and providers. So there's a whole slew of issues. And then on top of it, you had to go see your doctor in person to get a prescription as well. So at that time, the way digital health was moving forward, I just saw, I just kind of had foresight that this is going to be something that's going to be a mandatory and necessary tool for the providers. So we started looking into it. We started building the software. My partner and I, he had kind of like the medical background and I had the technology background. And, fast forward to, we built the software, we were able to get funding and whatnot. And as we were doing that, there was another problem that we came across. And that was, okay, we can get the prescription to the patients through the providers. However, patients are not picking up their medications. And I didn't understand why. So when we started digging into it more, we realized that 80% of people that do not pick up their medications are not picking them up because of the cost, the out-of-pocket cost. It's in a way, it's a sticker shock. You could have insurance and you go to your pharmacy to pick it up, but then your copay is really expensive because it's like, on a formulary, or you need prior authorization, and then that delays the prescription process. Some people don't have insurance, so 30 million patients don't have insurance at all, and so in those cases, some prescriptions aren't covered, and then there's various different reasons. So I started looking into this, and I thought that was crazy that people should be able to pick up their medications, right? So that's basically what I started looking into. And so that turned into like a 7-year quest of solving that problem. And by the time the last year of our company, we had actually gotten there. We built a first proprietary algorithm for price transparency at the point of care without the patient having to change their behaviors or the provider having to do anything different in their workflow.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to comment on the way the healthcare system works in the States from the outside, having never lived with it. But certainly some of the things you read in the headlines about it, it's sounds like it's got a fair share of problems, I guess, a bit of a polite way of putting it.
Yes. And so I'm Canadian. I've never had to deal with medical health, insurance related issues, prescription related issues. Even if you have to pay out of pocket, it was still manageable. And so for me as a Canadian mindset coming into the US health system, I said, this is crazy. Like, people should be able to get their medications. And, I forget the latest stats, but I'd say around 70% of bankruptcies, and you can fact check me, but 70% of bankruptcies are because of healthcare costs. People cannot afford their healthcare bills. So it's sad, right? Like, that is something that can benefit everyone in terms of the quality of life that the person is trying to live, but also from an economical standpoint as a society that is contributing to a lot of debt, in the US as well.
That is a terrifying statistic, actually. Wow.
It might be 80%. I just can't remember it
Yeah, I mean,
right now, so I'm saying 70.
yeah, but frankly, anything more than 10% is a pretty terrifying number to me. But
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
That's almost, yeah. Anyway, let's not dwell on that. And of course, the other big problem that you solved there, which glossed over a little bit, is universal, I think, to any doctor. And there's an old joke about it, isn't there? It's the handwriting.
Yeah. The electronic prescription solved a lot of problems in that you're now choosing medication from a list of medications. We were able to pull in, former health data on the patients themselves, so we can see what other medications the patients are on. So if there's any drug-to-drug interaction related issues, or the patient has allergies or anything along that problem is completely solved. The doctor doesn't have to do extra administrative work to go and do checks and balances on this patient. And it was very difficult to do, to be quite honest. So that solved that problem. And then prior authorization, if a patient needed prior authorization for their medication through their insurance, that alone could cause a 2-week or longer delay in the patient getting their medication. And then the abandonment rate also goes up significantly. So the patient by that point, then not that they lose interest, but for whatever reason, then it's just off the top of their mind and or not on top of their mind, and then they just end up abandoning it because it was such a gruesome process. So that electronic prescription process really solved a lot of those issues. And I'm not going to pretend and say that we were the only company that did this. We were the 5th company in the US that was given a SaaS license to be able to do this and provide this service as a software as a service. The differentiator for us was we were the only ones that targeted telehealth, digital health consumers first, and then that later expanded to health offices and hospitals and clinics and whatnot.
And I imagine it was quite a timely thing as well with what happened then. I mean, you said you exited in 2019, so you probably just about missed it, didn't you, with COVID the next year?
Yes, yeah. So they had I haven't kept on top of things, but COVID, so that's kind of where we had foresight into the future that telehealth would take over. I think we were earlier when it came to our forecasting. So we thought telehealth would take over a lot sooner, but because of insurance claims and telehealth coverage with insurance companies, that process took longer. But then when COVID hit, all of a sudden it accelerated.
Yeah, and something else that I suppose is unfortunately common wherever you go with any kind of healthcare is the bureaucracy side of it.
Yeah.
So any service like yours where you're going to cut down some of the red tape, as we say in the UK, it's got to be a good thing, hasn't it? So yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
really applaud
absolutely.
that. Out of those innovations then, maybe there's a couple others you haven't mentioned yet, but which one would you say are you most proud of?
Yeah, I would say the algorithm for price transparency, that ended up being a lot more cumbersome and time consuming than I thought it would. And I think some of that around, there was bureaucracy. There was, challenges when it came to the tech side of things. And the other thing with the US health system is a lot of the health systems are not interconnected together. So we had to find creative ways to find health data and consolidate and, make sure that everything leveled up when it came to the patient's information. And I mean, to be honest, I don't know how it is in the UK, but in the US, if you go to a new hospital or you go to just even if you're going for a follow-up with your current hospital, they ask you forms like what medications are you taking, what supplements are you taking, and the majority of people can't spell out the medications that they're on. They know that they're taking something, but they don't know the exact name. So that in itself, can cause issues where the provider doesn't know exactly, what they're taking.
Yeah, I can see how that would have such a huge impact for the patient as well. I mean, it's just the peace of mind alone of knowing you don't have to remember that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And digitizing that entire process takes a burden off the patient, but it also gives trust to the provider in that they know, they have a better view of that patient's profile.
What was it that first got you interested in that kind of the crossover between healthcare and technology and this specific problem as well? What drew you to it?
Yeah, so in Canada, when I was working in Canada, I was mostly working it was just by chance and by opportunity. I was working in the financial space. So I worked with a lot of the banks out there as a service provider and partner. And then at one point, I joined a company which was a healthcare startup company based out of Toronto, and they were working with hospitals in the US, and they were digitizing a lot of different things. But one of the things that they were doing was digitizing the triage and the registration process that was taking about 60 minutes for each patient to come in, register themselves, and then go to the clinic that they needed to go to. So they were developing this kiosk where the patient could go to the kiosk, register themselves. I mean, it's just like the airport now, right? You go straight to the kiosk. So it's basically the same idea. So you go to the kiosk, you go in, put in your information, and it tells you what gate to go, and it spits out your boarding pass. So that was basically that solution. And now this is, I think, 15 years ago. So it was a very new technology, and it was saving the clinics, the patients were saving over an hour in their time, because first they were standing in line or like waiting in the waiting area for 60 minutes or longer. This, reduced it to 30 seconds. So they go in, they register, and then the clinic received an alert right away that the patient is registered and they're coming over. So that's kind of where my first interest and passion for healthcare really began. And it was also an introduction to the healthcare system in the United States, where I saw so many opportunities. It was, it still is, but there's so many opportunities here in terms of like it's fragmented. And as I mentioned before, like a lot of health systems don't speak to each other, but they're getting better. And things are moving along a lot faster now than they were 10, 15 years ago.
Funny the pace of change, isn't it, and progress, particularly where there's the crossover with technology. It's just becoming so rapid now, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. And then so I moved to the United States in 2012, and I knew that I wanted to stay in the healthcare space at that time because there was so much opportunity. I really saw the opportunity for innovation. And in finance is great. I think finance is a lot better now because there's a lot of areas of innovation that's occurring now. But back then, in finance, it was really about the infrastructure and the operations on the back end side. And I was just really hungry for development of new technology.
Yeah, and I guess finance has it's had a few shocks, hasn't it? There's been a lot of pressure from the regulatory side to reform and all of that kind of thing, like the credit crunch and all of that.
Yeah, healthcare is the same. So healthcare is a very highly regulated industry as well. Yes, there are issues and there's opportunities and things that could be better over here, but it's highly regulated. So there's a lot of pieces that play into going to market from an idea. So you have to really be committed to seeing it through, because it could take in healthcare, like if you're looking at digital innovation in, I don't know retail that well, but let's say you're looking at retail, like I'll take DoorDash as an example, not to name drop or anything, but DoorDash was very successful because it's retail. It was very easy, or Uber it was direct to consumer. And yes, they had to deal with regulations down the road and figure out ethics and whatnot, but they were able to go to market a lot faster than you can in healthcare and in finance. Like they're just highly regulated areas where you have to make sure that, everyone along the path understands who's going to be impacted, what is going to be impacted. There's data privacy issues that come into play. There's, leaking of information that comes into play. There's HIPAA requirements that come into play. There's so many different factors that come into play. So going to market in healthcare as a startup, you have to really be committed to see it through.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, the data protection angle is quite interesting as well, isn't it? Because I guess it's not as bad in the States, but certainly in the UK and most of Europe, we had this big thing a few years back with GDPR, and suddenly every company had to be aware of what to do and how to do it.
Yeah.
Interesting. So since then, what have you been doing since 2019? What's your next big thing?
So I don't have a next big thing. I am actually working. So I rejoined corporate. So after leaving Easy Scripts, I took some time off and I joined Salesforce. And I got involved in the healthcare space with data and analytics at Salesforce. And, now AI, I saw the potential for AI and data and analytics. And that's a lot of the areas that I was working in with Easy Scripts. So it just felt like a really good fit. And so, Salesforce invests a lot of money when it comes to AI and in their products. And there's a lot of research and development that goes into it. So it was an exciting time for me to go back into corporate and see what I can contribute. And that's basically what I've been doing since.
Another inescapable piece of technology these days, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the old AI. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. I don't know how much you can tell us, how much you're willing to talk about it, but how is Salesforce applying it? What's interesting about that?
So I think Salesforce is known as a CRM company, but they're really more than that. It's really the CRM process is like a workflow. So having so the CRM started off, as a tool for salespeople, but now that same CRM process now is actually across several different industries. So I'll say, for example, from a healthcare standpoint, a lot of healthcare companies use Salesforce because you can take the data that's internal to your company and you can actually then start building predictions based on the data that you are consuming in. And so the different data sources come in. So on the one side, you can build predictions. You can see the workflow. You can see exactly I'll give an example of patients. So you can see where the patients are, in their treatment plan or their health profile. And then you can build predictions based on what actions need to be taken for that patient potentially. And so doctors can go in and providers and health staff can see prior to the patient even coming in, what this patient's profile is and based on certain factors and data sets predict certain actions that need to be taken to better serve the patient.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like an interesting, not just for healthcare. If you can predict a customer journey, I guess. And
so it's not just customer journey. It's trends and it's information based on any industry. So, finance. So currently I'm also working on the finance side and there's a financial services cloud and there's the health cloud. And so basically it's the same thing, but it's a different profile. So the finance cloud supports finance-based companies based on how their banking or whichever world they're in, insurance works. And so, so it's been really exciting. I can't say too much more. And I don't want to say the wrong thing either, but it's been really interesting. I've been learning a lot and I really have a better appreciation. After being in a startup, I have a better appreciation coming back into corporate about how much time and work and research it takes to get to this place.
Yeah, no, sorry, I was being nosy. I was just curious.
Oh, it's okay.
So, I recognize Salesforce. I've used it in past jobs. And so it's interesting to hear what else they're working on. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, back to your time then as an entrepreneur. What was the biggest obstacle you had to overcome to make that business succeed?
Oh, biggest. I don't know. I think it depended on the day. I guess the biggest was money. So, initially I bootstrapped the company and we didn't have much. So I had to be very scrappy and build, a very small product that I was able to scale. And then eventually it was raising enough funds to keep the company going and then to scale. So, money was a big factor, but it's not just the money it's not as easy as, all right, you build a product, you scale it, and then you raise money and then you're good to go. It was, all right, you're bootstrapping it. Now you're dealing with developers. You're trying to make sure that everything is up to standards when it comes to the healthcare codes and regulations and all of that, when you're raising money, it's a whole other set of problems. Like you're now dealing with investors and different types of investors and what their stake would be and how much money they would get out of the exit of the company and how much they would, is it going to be a debt investor or is it going to be an equity investor? And then there's terms and conditions. So there's legal aspects that played in there as well. So, and then it was scaling. So then scaling the product and building it in parallel to raising the funds, scaling the product so that the customers were satisfied. So if they went, in some cases, we had customers that were initially 10 doctors, and they were about to scale to 3,000. So we had to be ready for that, to occur. So it's hard to say what was the biggest challenge because every day was different. But if I had to just, say one thing, it would be the money factor.
Okay, money. And it sounds like the biggest challenge really was the fact that there were so many challenges.
Yes.
I guess that's just running a business, isn't it?
It's just running a business. It's just learning. Yeah. I was chatting with someone yesterday about, getting an MBA versus doing a startup. And it's a fast track to getting an MBA because when you're studying for an MBA, not knocking the education aspect of it at all, but it's a lot of theory. Unless you're actually in it and you're sweating and you're grinding, you have no idea what it takes, to actually be successful. You could read all about it as much as you want, but unless you're actually doing it and you've got skin in the game, you're not going to really realize what it takes. And you're not going to have an appreciation for it until you do that either.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot to be said, isn't there, for the practical knowledge.
Yeah.
As you say, you can read as much as you want, but at the end of the day, it's just theory. It doesn't mean anything if you don't know how it actually works.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of benefit, to the education and preparing for it. But, I was in corporate for 16 years before I did my startup. And I thought there was no one more prepared than I was because I had seen every single industry and I had built and helped other businesses scale. But I was a management consultant. And so I came in with the lens, and I was a software developer as well. I played different roles, but I was always in the supportive role as opposed to the role that was actually executing and now having to navigate marketing versus sales versus investors versus regulators. So, there's so many different aspects and you have to be on top of everything. You have to have your A game on at all times. There is and when you're in corporate, you can be focused on what your expertise is. But when you are in a startup, you have to be willing to learn and grind and be an expert in every single aspect of that business.
Yeah, the analogy I like is keeping all the plates spinning.
Yeah.
All the sticks with it, yeah. I think that sums it up pretty well, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
If you haven't already mentioned it, you may have, but what are the lessons that have stuck with you the most from your time as an entrepreneur, as a business founder?
I would say the biggest lesson would be, or some of the lessons would be, remain curious, remain open. I think I just mentioned that, I thought I was prepared when I did my startup because I had 16 years of corporate experience. So I had a bit of confidence in me. And then as soon as I started, I realized how much I didn't know and how much I had to learn about the healthcare industry, not only just as being a non-native American, but learning all the nuances of technology and how it intersects with healthcare and the problems that patients were dealing with and insurance companies were dealing with. So it wasn't just building a software, it was all the other pieces. So I'd say, remaining curious and willing to learn as much as you can. I think that probably is like the biggest lesson because that plays into the other areas too. So I was able to focus on when it came to the legal areas, like I had to dig down deep and learn about, all legal terms when it came to investors and potential issues and liabilities that we may cause our customers and, all that. So curiosity is definitely big. Like go in with an open mind, thinking that you're going to be learning a lot and you have to be ready for growth.
It's kind of a tale of two halves, isn't it? A double-edged sword, or whatever other cliche we'd like to use. Because I think you do have to you've got to always be open to learn. I think that's true of any any role, isn't it, really, in any career almost.
Yes.
But I think when you're an entrepreneur as well, you've also got to have a bit of faith in yourself and your abilities. So I think that's one thing I found particularly was when I first started out in the business, it was actually surprising myself a few times on what I could do. And there's things that I would never have gone within a mile of in previous jobs when I worked for other people.
Yes.
But when you're doing it for yourself, and you just have to, because there isn't anyone else.
That's right.
And actually, and it's really good for the confidence as well, isn't it? When you realise, oh, actually, I can do that.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, 100% agreed. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's do a few questions about leadership then, because after all, that's the theme of the podcast. So, first question on that then. In your opinion, what do you think leaders in your industry, so let's say healthcare to start with, most often get right?
What do they most often get right? That change is inevitable and required.
Okay. And is that healthcare specific? Would the same apply to the technology industry, would you say? Or?
That's a good question. I think in healthcare, my great appreciation, because I've worked with a lot of providers in healthcare. So I think what I really appreciate from the providers has been that they have recognized that the systems are broken and need to be fixed, and change is required in order for them, because they're in it, they're living it, they're breathing it, and they are hungry for it as well. And so they're open to the technology. So I think I was able to appreciate it more in healthcare than in some of the other industries I worked in prior.
That's interesting, because the first step is getting people to acknowledge the changes required.
Now, when it comes to execution, people don't like change.
That was going to be my next question. So did you find the rest of the process easier as a result? Maybe not.
Because change requires also being self-aware, behavior change in yourself, but also behavior change in your organization. And now you're dealing with, so let's say, for example, like changing behavior in your organization in itself, I think is not an easy task anyways, but now you're also looking at things you can't control. So in healthcare, for example, changing patients' behavior is extremely difficult. And everyone has their own ways of dealing things, how they've navigated the world. So and that's one of the reasons why myself, in my role at Easy Scripts, I did not want to tackle changing the behavior of the patients, because I knew that was going to be an uphill battle. So I said, what can I do without them having to change their behavior and still get the benefit? So I think that is one of the biggest challenges too, is change requires, changing your habits, changing your behavior, changing your thoughts, changing your mindset, and then changing your process. The process is the end piece, but those steps before must come through as well.
That's more or less what I thought you were going to say, but I had to ask.
Yeah.
From a leadership perspective then, what do you think is the biggest mistake that a leader can make?
The biggest mistake that a leader could make is not seeing the whole picture and the end outcome of what that looks like. Like, why are you doing this? I hate to simplify it in what is your why kind of thing. That's I feel like that's become a trademark, but I do believe that, at least for myself, the reason I was able to make my company successful was I knew the why was I had to help the patients get their medications. Like, that was the end goal. And so all the other frustrations along the way, that was the end goal. And I think sometimes in any industry, if you're building a product or you're building something, you're looking at the easy thing to look at is, all right, you're building a software, you're trying to scale it, and you're going to make money, right? But is there a deeper purpose of you building that out? And I think that's an area that if leaders are going to fail, that's the area that it would happen, is like not seeing the whole picture.
There's two aspects to that in particular that you mentioned that I think certainly is where I've seen leaders fall down. The first of those is about the wider purpose thing, isn't it? And I think the workforce, in inverted commas, today are more they're more likely to get behind something where it does have a purpose for the common good. It's doing a moral good.
Yeah.
So I think that's clearly where your company was nailed on the head. And then the second aspect of it is actually communicating it well and making sure it's consistent throughout the whole organization. Because it's no good having a CEO who has that purpose there in their mind and no one else in the business knows what it is.
That's right. That's right. And then you still have to appeal in a smaller company. You still have to appeal to investors. You have to have that passion and message across with your employees. They have to believe in that product as well, because it's a grind. It's tough work. And, in some cases in startups, you're not getting paid what you're worth. But you're hoping that you're going to have a great exit and it's going to, 10 times at least what you thought you would get when you're working in corporate. So you have to have that message and that consistency across the board.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where there are no quick wins. So if you've got to play the long game, better to be doing it towards a goal you believe in, whether or not you end up making money.
That's right. That's right. I agree.
Yeah. Okay, next question. And this one I'm particularly interested in, I must say. So you mentioned right at the beginning when you were introducing yourself about how there weren't many women in the tech fields and certainly in the STEM arena when you started out. So, I mean, the first question is, what can leaders do to help change that and encourage more women to pursue those careers in the technology fields? I'll let you answer that first and I'll ask you my follow-up question.
Okay. So I think representation matters. And I think encouraging women to pursue those careers matters. I think when I was growing up, it wasn't something that, it's not that women weren't in those fields. And I think the reason I just got into it was I was curious and I wanted to get involved in technology. It was just really interesting to me. So, but in my mind, I didn't think that I was a woman and that's not a field that I should pursue, or that's not an option for me. Now, having said that, that was because, tech started booming around that time when I was just graduating high school. When I was younger, the women I saw that were working women were teachers, caretakers, nurses. Like those are the types of jobs that I saw. So the representation wasn't really there. So I just thought when I was growing up that I'll probably become a teacher. And, I like teaching. So that's just what was in my mind. And when I went into technology, like my view changed and, but there wasn't representation. And so there wasn't really a lot, not to say that there wasn't support, it's just I had to really prove myself that I also was capable. And some of it was subtle, some of it was very obvious, but that drove me to do better.
Interesting. You've actually answered my follow-up question.
Okay.
Well done.
See,
it was going to be, so what was it that drew you to that, even though quite often it's not presented in the way it is to men? But you've answered it was because you were led by the curiosity, which, I think that's really interesting. And the point about representation, I think, is very interesting because this is something I discussed quite a few times with previous guests as well. And I think that might be the first time that representation has come up specifically, because you're right. If you look at an organization and it's full of men who are all white and all of a certain age, most people, if they're not in that certain age and they're not men and they're not white, would look at that and go, well, that company doesn't want me, I'll go somewhere else. Or that industry doesn't want me, I'll go somewhere else. And that's exactly why representation is so important. So
I think
really good one.
Right. And I think also the one thing that also helped me was my family always said to me that women can do anything they want. So, you don't have to put yourself in, a specific field. Like you can do whatever you want. But I was only hearing it really at home. When I was outside of the home, I was hearing from my peers that, well, women don't do that. Women don't do this. Like you're just going to get, married and get pregnant anyways one day. And, so for my peers, it was interesting. My family didn't say this to me, but my peers when I was in the workforce were saying, why do you work so hard? You're just going to get married one day and have kids and, you're probably going to quit. And I said, what does me getting married, having kids have anything to do with my identity or what I'm pursuing in my career? It was just shocking for me to hear it in this day and age. Believe it or not, I even heard that 10 years ago. And actually, I even heard it when I was running my company. I had a couple folks that came in as consultants that I hired. And they said to me, why do you work so hard? Like, you should just, stay home and take care of your child and let someone else handle this. And I thought, I'm the founder of this company and I hired you. But it still happens, right? So it's shocking that in this day and age, it is still being said. So I think for me, my saving grace may have been in my family. That wasn't said to me. So I didn't really know that women couldn't do whatever we wanted. And so that's why I say representation also matters. I think another example is, I didn't see women in leadership roles on TV or leading countries that much. I mean, there were some, but when Kamala Harris was, sworn in that moment didn't even realize how impactful it would be. I said, wow, that's actually a female vice president that's being sworn in. This is history in the making. And it was in that moment that I realized I never had that representation. So it wasn't even something I realized until it actually occurred. And I think this is what's important. So if little girls see, that representation, their minds will change, their minds will open up, that they can pursue careers that are not just, looking pretty or being in fashion or design, there's nothing wrong with those industries at all, but there are other opportunities out there to pursue as well.
I agree with you. As you say, there's nothing wrong with those industries, but at the same time, that shouldn't be anyone's only choice, should it? Especially if it's not something that even vaguely interests you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sadly, no, it doesn't surprise me that you still hear that sort of thing. Partly because I've spent quite a lot of time in the aerospace industry, which is notorious for being run by those elderly white men that I mentioned earlier. And as for the consultants that you hired, I mean, my first thought there was, that's not a strong client retention strategy, is it?
It was pretty shocking. I mean, I think, it was pretty shocking to hear that. And I just let it pass.
Fair enough. You're a bigger person than I might have been in that situation. I
think it's just, I've been, so when I started 24 years ago in the industry, it was very male dominated. Things have changed drastically in a good way over the last few years, even. So I feel like I kind of grew up with that, and I that's what I know, and that's what I understand. So you kind of grow a thick skin anyways too, and you can ignore the comments that are not fruitful. And I mean, it's not fruitful for me to change someone else's mind. That's their perspective. That's their mind. I'm still going to do what I'm going to do. It's not going to change anything, and it's not going to deter me or push me, out of the industry. So be it.
This one hopefully is going to be a bit more of a difficult question, because I feel like you've been sailing through these so far. So. If you could go back in time to the start of your career, what advice would you give your younger self?
I would say maybe network more, and surround yourself with other high achievers. Because I think the thing that got me through my early stages, at least my 20s in my career, was I was a self-starter and I was self-motivated, but it helped. The few people along the way that came in really helped me open my eyes where, I may not have been able to see clearly. And I was young and learning the business and the ropes on my own. So I would say definitely surround yourself with other people that are high achievers and learn from others.
I think that's probably what I would say to myself as well, actually, because networking was always something that I avoided. It seemed like something I didn't want to be involved with.
Yeah.
Until quite recently, and now I actually quite enjoy it. And I think for me, the most powerful thing about it is you never know what help you might need in the future. So the more people you know who know more different things, the better.
Yes. And I would say, so for me, my integrity was a big area that once I put my name on something, I did not want to tarnish my reputation ever. So I always wanted everyone that came into contact with me to have a positive experience where they valued my work ethic. So that was something that I did have in me in my 20s. So that really helped me later in my 30s and in my 40s as well, because when I had the good relationships and they had a positive experience through my work ethic and the projects we worked on together or our time together, they remembered that. And so there was a lasting impression that, hey, you helped me out here. If you need help, let me help you out somewhere else, or let me at least give you my time. So that's invaluable. You can't get that in school. You can't get that, just by meeting people randomly. Like those are really nurturing relationships that you really have to pick and choose where you're going to invest and how you're going to invest your time.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess depending on how big of a company you work in as well, it's quite an important thing internally as well.
Yeah.
Particularly, I guess, with your experience as a management consultant in quite a big corporate, that's going to be quite an important thing to focus on, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting because there are still people that I have still good relationships with from EDS. And I was 21 when I started working there. So, I worked on so many different projects and so many different programs. And because they had a good experience with me, in some cases I worked with them again later in my life, but they still remember me. There's still people I could just call up and I haven't spoken to them in 15 years and it will be just as if I had spoken to them yesterday. And we have that commonality and the same values that we shared together. So I don't know if companies are still like that now because the work environment was very different back then. A lot of people don't really stay. I stayed at EDS for 7 years and then I went to Hewlett Packard for, I think 4 or 5 years. And in combination, that was a lot of time, in those two companies. And then Hewlett Packard bought EDS. So technically the same company, but, not a lot of people stay in a company that long anymore. However, whether you're staying in a company for 2 years or you're staying for 10 years, I think your work ethic, your integrity, and your values, if those show up in your work, people will remember.
Yeah, I think so too. And I don't know, there's an argument, isn't there? If you're staying in a job for less time, then that makes it more important, doesn't it?
Yeah, it probably does.
Yeah. Interesting though. Yeah, and you're right, of course, the nature of work has changed drastically. But again, I think that makes it more important because we don't have the natural ease of access to these kind of connections that we might have 10 years ago.
Yes.
So I think you need to place more importance on that than we might have before.
Yeah. So you almost, if you don't know if you're going to stay with the company, for more than 2 years, then, you almost have to invest more time in the people that you're working with and have a good relationship with them and make impact. Higher impact. I mean, for me, when I was at EDS, although I was there for a long time, my projects were time-based projects. So some projects were 6 months, some were 12 months. So I was always working with different people and it was almost, a new job for every different project that I was getting. So I didn't feel like it was the same company. I wasn't doing the same mundane things over and over again. It was always changing and I was always growing. But, the people, sometimes I worked with the same people like 2 or 3 years later. And sometimes I didn't work with folks after the first 6 months.
And I mean, another thing you hear about even with people moving jobs more frequently is they quite often end up returning to the same company later as well. So it's avoiding that short-termist view, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Leadership heroes.
Last question is usually my favorite question. We'll see what you come out with.
Okay.
It's called Leadership Heroes.
Okay.
So the question is, if you had to pick one person, and they can be alive or dead, past, present, real, fictitious, anything you like, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
Oh, there are so many. This one I needed to think about. There's so many leaders. I think there are the leaders that we know. So, for example, like people that have shaped our world, like Einstein. He was a scientist, obviously. So, in different ways. Alexander Bell, like they were innovators. Obama changed history by, his representation in the White House. So, he's a very interesting person as well. I think there's just so many, like, I think you stumped me on this one. There are a lot of people I really admire. And then there are the unsung heroes as well in everyday life, where I have come across high achievers and a lot of people that are very motivated and energetic, and they come in to work and they bring their all. Those are the ones also I feel I really look up to. So, there's just, I would say, like, anyone who changed the history when it came to innovation, they set the stage for business and leadership.
Okay.
I know not the greatest answer. Sorry.
No, it's okay. We've had Einstein before.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've had Alexander Bell, and I don't think we've had Obama either. So if you had to pick one of those two, which would it be?
I'm going to say Alexander Bell.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And why?
Well, because he was an innovator of communication. Without that, we wouldn't have, we went from having Morse code to telephones to now cell phones, and the world revolves around this digital technology.
Yeah, definitely. Communication is a big pillar of good leadership, isn't it? So making that so much more accessible for people. We wouldn't be having this conversation right now without him, would we? So
exactly. So I think, I think the fact that he didn't take no for an answer, that is a quality of a leader. A leader really believes truly in their ideas and they push forward. So, that's a quality of a leader that you have to recognize in yourself.
Yes, within the scope of the vision. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's an interesting answer and one I've not had before. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Well, it's been lovely chatting with you today. Last thing that I'd do as well is, if the listeners would like to learn more about you or get in touch, is there a website you'd like to point them towards, or LinkedIn profile or anything like that?
LinkedIn is the best way to get a hold of me. I check LinkedIn a couple of times a week. So if you have questions, go ahead. You can follow me, add me, ask questions out there.
Lovely. Okay. And I'll put the link to your profile in the episode description as well, so everyone can find it easily. Well, that's it. That's great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, David.
Gule, thank you again so much for your time. That was a really interesting conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. Listeners, if you would like to learn more, please do reach out. I'm sure Gule would love to hear from you, and I've put a link to her LinkedIn profile in the episode description. If you are a leader yourself, if you are a new manager, a first-time leader, and you're struggling to get the best from your people, and you would like to learn more about leadership and become a more people-focused leader, then please do get in touch with me as well. Best way to do that is to visit www.leadernotaboss.com. That's all I've got time for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you again next week. In the meantime, stay safe and remember, be a leader, not a boss.